May 16, 1990, Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, Los Angeles. Frank Sinatra sat in the hospital corridor, his hands shaking as he held a letter Sammy Davis Jr. had written just hours before slipping into his final coma. "Francis, I need you to promise me something," the letter began, "something that will hurt you more than my death ever could." Frank read those words 3 times before the full weight hit him. His best friend, his brother, the man he'd called family for 35 years, was asking him to do the impossible. And what Sammy asked Frank to do that day didn't just honor a dying wish. It shattered Frank Sinatra's heart and rebuilt him into a completely different man. But why would Sammy's final request destroy the legendary chairman of the board? And how did one letter change the course of both their legacies forever? To understand this story, we have to go back, not to the hospital room where Sammy lay dying, but to a smoky nightclub in 1954 where 2 legends first met and changed each other's lives forever. The Mocambo nightclub, West Hollywood. Frank Sinatra's career was in shambles. His voice was gone, his movie deals were drying up, and the press was calling him finished. At 39, the man who had once been America's sweetheart was now yesterday's news. That's when he first heard about a young black performer who was tearing up stages across the country. A kid who could sing, dance, do impressions, play multiple instruments, and command a room like no one Frank had ever seen. "You gotta see this Sammy Davis Jr. kid," Dean Martin had told Frank over drinks. "He's got something special, Pally. Something that reminds me of a young chairman of the board." Frank was intrigued, not just by the talent, but by the challenge. In 1954, bringing a black performer into your inner circle wasn't just controversial, it was career suicide. But Frank Sinatra had never been one to play it safe. When Frank first walked into the Copa room at the Sands to watch Sammy perform, he expected talent. What he didn't expect was to witness someone who performed with the same hunger, the same desperate need to prove himself, that Frank recognized in his own soul. Sammy was in the middle of Mr. Bojangles when he spotted Frank in the audience. For a moment, the 29-year-old performer faltered. Frank Sinatra was watching him. The Frank Sinatra. But instead of getting nervous, Sammy did something that sealed their friendship forever. He began doing an impression of Frank, singing Young at Heart in Frank's exact style, but with his own spin that somehow made it both homage and innovation. The audience erupted. Frank threw back his head and laughed, the first real laugh he'd had in months. After the show, Frank went backstage. "Kid," he said, extending his hand, "that was either the greatest compliment or the greatest insult I've ever seen." Sammy grinned. "Depends on how good you thought it was, Mr. Sinatra. Call me Frank, and it was perfect." Welcome to Sammy Davis Jr. Secret Stories, the only channel dedicated to uncovering the untold moments that shaped the legend himself. I'm thrilled you're here with us today. Whether you're watching from New York, London, Tokyo, or anywhere else in the world, you're now part of our family that celebrates the incredible life of Mr. Entertainment. If this is your first time here, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. We drop new exclusive stories about Sammy every week that you won't find anywhere else. And if this story moves you, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. Your support helps us bring these amazing untold tales to light. Now, let's dive into tonight's incredible story that changed both their lives forever. That backstage meeting in 1954 began a friendship that would define both men for the rest of their lives. Frank became Sammy's protector, his champion, his brother, and Sammy became Frank's conscience, his reminder of what real courage looked like. Through the Rat Pack years, through the highs of Vegas and the lows of personal scandal, through marriages and divorces and comebacks and failures, Frank and Sammy were inseparable. When the world tried to tear Sammy down for marrying Swedish actress May Britt, Frank stood by him. When Frank's career hit rough patches, Sammy was there to remind him of his greatness. "You two are like an old married couple," Dean Martin once joked, "except you fight more." It was true. Frank and Sammy could argue about anything: music, politics, women, the proper way to mix a martini. But underneath every argument was a love so deep, so genuine, that it transcended the usual Hollywood friendships built on mutual benefit. "Sammy's not just my friend," Frank once told a reporter. "He's my family, my brother. There's nothing I wouldn't do for that little cat." Those words would come back to haunt Frank in ways he never imagined. By 1989, both men were in their 70s. Frank was still performing, but age was catching up with him. His memory was starting to fail, his voice wasn't what it used to be, and the fire that had driven him for 6 decades was beginning to flicker. Sammy, meanwhile, was facing his own battle. Throat cancer had stolen his voice, the instrument that had made him famous. The man who had never stopped moving, never stopped performing, was forced to slow down for the first time in his life. But even as cancer ravaged his body, Sammy's spirit remained unbroken. He continued to work, continued to fight, continued to be the optimistic, life-affirming force that had inspired Frank for 35 years. It was during this time that Sammy made a decision that would change everything. On March 15, 1990, Sammy called Frank with news that would shatter both their worlds. "Francis," Sammy said, his voice barely a whisper from the cancer treatments, "I need to see you. Tonight. It's important." Frank drove to Sammy's Beverly Hills home immediately. When he arrived, he found his friend sitting in his study, surrounded by photo albums, letters, and memorabilia from their decades together. "Sit down, Frank," Sammy said. "We need to talk." For the next 3 hours, Sammy told Frank something he'd been hiding for months. The cancer wasn't responding to treatment. The doctors had given him weeks, maybe days. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what Sammy was about to ask Frank to do. "Francis," Sammy said, pulling out a manila envelope, "I'm going to give you something, and I need you to promise me you'll do what it says, no matter how much it hurts." Frank's hands trembled as he took the envelope. "Smokey, whatever it is, the answer is yes. You know that." "Don't say yes until you know what I'm asking," Sammy warned, "because what I'm about to ask you, it's going to break your heart." Inside the envelope was a letter, written in Sammy's careful handwriting, despite his weakening condition. Frank read it once, then again, his face growing pale. "Jesus, Sam," Frank whispered, "you can't ask me to do this." "I can and I am," Sammy said firmly, "because if you don't, everything we've worked for, everything we've built, it all dies with me." What was in that letter? What was Sammy asking Frank to do that would cause such anguish? The letter contained Sammy's final request. Frank was to cut all ties with him publicly. No visits to the hospital, no attendance at the funeral, no public statements of grief or loss. Frank Sinatra was to act as if Sammy Davis Jr. had never existed. "Why?" Frank demanded, tears streaming down his face. "Why would you ask me to abandon you?" Sammy's response revealed the depth of his love for his friend and his understanding of how the world worked. "Francis, listen to me. When I die, they're going to come for you. The press, the public, everyone who's ever resented our friendship. They're going to say you only kept me around for show, that I was your token, that our friendship was fake." Sammy paused, gathering strength. "But if you stay away, if you grieve privately, if you let them think you didn't care, then our friendship stays pure. It stays ours. No one can touch it, no one can diminish it, no one can turn it into something ugly." Frank was sobbing now. "I can't do it, Sam. I can't pretend you don't matter to me." "You're not pretending I don't matter," Sammy said gently. "You're protecting what we have. You're keeping it sacred." The letter went on to explain Sammy's reasoning in heartbreaking detail. He had seen how the media had treated their friendship over the years, always looking for angles, always trying to reduce it to something less than it was. He couldn't bear the thought of his death becoming another opportunity for people to diminish what they had shared. "Besides," Sammy had written, "I know the truth. I know you love me. I know you'll grieve for me every day for the rest of your life, and I know that love doesn't need witnesses to be real." Frank read that line over and over, his heart breaking with each word. "Promise me, Francis," Sammy said. "Promise me you'll stay away." Frank looked at his friend, this little man who had faced down racism, death threats, and every obstacle life could throw at him with dignity and grace. How could he refuse him anything? "I promise," Frank whispered. "But God help me, Sam. This is going to kill me." Sammy smiled. "No, it won't. It's going to save you. Because every time someone says I didn't matter to you, you'll know the truth. And that truth will make you stronger." 2 months later, on May 16, 1990, Sammy Davis Jr. died at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. Frank Sinatra was not at his bedside. He was not at the funeral. He made no public statements. To the world it appeared that the chairman of the board was unmoved by the death of his supposed best friend. The reaction was swift and brutal. "Sinatra shows true colors," read one headline. "Fair weather friend," read another. The press that had always been suspicious of their relationship now had proof, they thought, that it had all been an act. Frank read every article, absorbed every criticism, felt every accusation, like a knife to his heart. But he kept his promise. What the world didn't see was Frank sitting alone in his Palm Springs home, crying as he played Sammy's records. What they didn't see was him watching old Rat Pack footage and talking to the television screen as if Sammy could hear him. What they didn't see was the broken man who had lost not just his best friend, but his right to mourn him publicly. Dean Martin tried to comfort him. "Frank, people who know you, they understand. They know how much Sam meant to you." "But they don't," Frank replied. "That's the point. Nobody understands." And that's how Sam wanted it. For months, Frank struggled with his promise. He wanted to tell the world what Sammy had asked him to do, wanted to explain why he had stayed away. But that would have violated the spirit of Sammy's request. Then, 6 months after Sammy's death, something happened that changed everything. Frank was performing at Radio City Music Hall when a woman in the audience shouted out, "Sing something for Sammy." Frank stopped mid-song. For a moment, he stood there in silence, wrestling with his promise. Then he made a decision that would honor both his friend's request and his own need to grieve. He began to sing "The Way You Look Tonight," the song that had become Sammy's signature during their Rat Pack performances. But he changed the lyrics, singing it as if Sammy were still there with him. "Lovely, never, never change, keep that breathless charm." Frank sang, his voice breaking with emotion. "You're gonna live forever, you beautiful little cat." The audience was confused at first, but those who knew the history understood. Frank was finding a way to honor Sammy without violating his promise. He was grieving publicly without explaining why he had stayed away. From that night forward, Frank found subtle ways to keep Sammy's memory alive without betraying his friend's final wish. He would dedicate songs to a friend who's watching from somewhere up there. He would tell stories about a performer who taught me what real talent looked like, without mentioning names. The press never caught on. They continued to believe that Frank hadn't cared about Sammy, that their friendship had been a sham. But Frank's true fans, the people who really knew him, began to understand that his silence was actually the loudest expression of love possible. Years later, Frank's daughter Nancy found him in his study, reading Sammy's letter for what must have been the 1,000th time. "Dad," she said gently, "you know you kept your promise, right? You did what he asked." Frank looked up, his eyes still bright with unshed tears, even 5 years after Sammy's death. "I know, baby," he said, "but the promise, it changed me. Sam knew it would. He knew that keeping that secret would teach me something about love that I'd never understood before." "What did it teach you?" Nancy asked. Frank was quiet for a long moment, then smiled, the first genuine smile Nancy had seen from him since Sammy's death. It taught me that the deepest love doesn't need applause. The strongest friendship doesn't need witnesses. And sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is to let them go quietly, without making it about yourself. Frank paused, looking at the photo of him and Sammy that he kept on his desk. Sam's last gift to me wasn't just asking me to stay away. It was showing me that real love means protecting someone's dignity, even when they're gone, especially when they're gone. The letter Sammy had written contained one final paragraph that Frank had never shared with anyone. "Francis, I know this will be the hardest thing you've ever done, but I also know it will make you a better man. You've spent your whole life needing everyone to know how much you care. I'm asking you to care so much that you let nobody know. That kind of love, silent, private, pure, that's the kind of love that lasts forever." Frank kept that promise until the day he died in 1998. He never publicly explained why he had stayed away from Sammy's funeral. He never told the world about the letter, about the sacrifice he had made, about the daily pain of being misunderstood. But those closest to Frank noticed the change in him after Sammy's death. He became more private, more thoughtful, less concerned with his public image. He seemed to have found a peace that had eluded him his entire career. "Dad was different after Sammy died," Nancy Sinatra later recalled. "Sadder, yes, but also deeper somehow, like he'd learned something important about himself." What Frank had learned was something Sammy had been trying to teach him for 35 years, that the most important things in life happen away from the spotlight, that real love doesn't need publicity, that true friendship can survive anything, even the appearance of abandonment. The irony was perfect, and Sammy would have appreciated it. In asking Frank to publicly ignore his death, Sammy had given Frank the greatest lesson of his life, that love without recognition is the purest love of all. When Frank died 8 years later, among his personal effects was Sammy's letter, worn from being handled so many times. Next to it was a letter Frank had written but never sent, a response to Sammy that said simply, "You were right, you beautiful little cat. The love that nobody sees is the love that never dies. Thank you for teaching me how to love you properly. Thank you for trusting me with your dignity. Thank you for making me a better man by asking me to be a better friend." Today, the true story of Sammy's dying wish remains largely unknown. History remembers Frank Sinatra's absence from Sammy Davis Jr.'s funeral as evidence of a shallow friendship. But the truth is the opposite. It was the deepest expression of friendship possible. Sammy Davis Jr.'s final gift to Frank Sinatra wasn't just a lesson in love, it was a lesson in sacrifice, in putting someone else's needs above your own desires, in finding strength in silence. And Frank's willingness to honor that request, to endure years of criticism and misunderstanding, to let the world think less of him rather than betray his friend's trust. That might be the most beautiful love story never told. In the end, Sammy was right. Their friendship did stay pure. It stayed sacred. It stayed theirs. And sometimes the greatest love stories are the ones nobody gets to see. May 16, 1990. The day Sammy Davis Jr. made a dying wish that broke Frank Sinatra's heart and made him whole again. The day two friends discovered that the most powerful love is the love that asks for nothing, not even recognition. The day Frank Sinatra learned that sometimes loving someone means letting the world think you don't.